All right, hard yarners. Delby has left the building. He just left for a flight to Adelaide for Fringe, which I should have plugged, but if you're in Adelaide, go watch him. But before I get onto our incredible guests, if you're watching behind, you can see behind our guest, alltradescover.com.au. We are brought to you today by, and if you do you have a trade business or anything on the side that you need insurance for?
I'd have to consider where Ange runs a yoga studio, so that's a trade of sorts.
Well, potentially, yeah. So I'm not going to give a specific example because they don't like us giving a specific example. But if you're specifically a smaller trade business, hit them up. Make sure you drop the hard yarns, and they'll be very competitive with their quotes. But definitely, I'm going to use them for my liability insurance for my event that I dropped a bit of information about at the end of the episode. This episode is also brought to you by Feed. Feed is a animal-based, it's locally sourced, pasture-raised and ethically sourced animal-based supplement, so it's far more bioavailable. You absorb it better. And they've got the liver, beef, organ complex, collagen, honey, any number of supplements. So get around them, drop the code word hard yarn, you'll get, I think, 15% off or potentially 10% off. Can't remember. Should be more across that. My bad. This episode is also brought to you by Kahuna Golf. Look good, feel good, play good. If you want to look good while you're playing golf. Do you play golf?
I call it something else with the letters WF. But
yeah, well, you might play better if you were.
No, I do enjoy it.
I'll give you
with young twins, surfing,
bit of time,
diving. Yeah, it's
yeah. Well, I'll give you a hat as we leave. But look good, feel good, play good. Kahuna Golf. They've got the floral arrangements for your golf shirts, good shorts, golf rags, hats, everything. So hit them up again. Hard yarn for 15% off. And finally, this episode is brought to you by Goat Tape, which if you're watching at home, you can see it's on here. You put it on the bridge of your nose. Have you ever used anything like that?
No, but I'd like to.
Mate, I'll give you some as you leave. Bloody awesome. So you put them on, helps you get a lot more oxygen in, but you definitely notice the benefits when you're sleeping. You wake up, you just feel better when you wake up. You don't feel like you're sluggish and dragging yourself out of bed. So that was the biggest thing I noticed. Apparently it helps with your snoring, and the mouth tape certainly does. So again, code word hard yarn for 10 to 15% off all of those sponsors stuff. So today we were joined by Ryan Burns, member of the Libertarian Party. Very good chat, actually. We didn't really talk too much policy. We talked a bit about the world and what was going on, but we did touch on some things. So do you remember much of what we chatted about? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Well, we did talk about libertarian principles.
Yep.
We spoke a little bit about the party, but we traversed the whole world. We talked
World
War I and World War II history.
We did a lot of history on the war, which was great.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I've lost a lot of what I've forgotten more than I know right now, but I could talk for hours on that.
It was a very good chat. Talked about plenty of the balance of power within Parliament and how important it is we get the minor parties in. A bit of self-censorship. What was the window?
The Overton Window.
The Overton Window and how that's sort of shifting.
I think Delby was very interested in my underground mining experience.
Yeah, he got into the mining.
So apologies to those. We did get a little bit technical. I was trying to use layman's terms, and then all my underground mining mates will just be sticking the boots in.
100%. But definitely great to get another opinion and another viewpoint across when it comes to the upcoming election. And really appreciate your time. So let's get hard.
Welcome to Hard Yarns Podcast.
I am fucking fat.
Anything Chris White says, please disregard it.
5D is actually a state of being. It's a unity consciousness.
That was Hard Yarns with me, Frankie Rose. So I'm going to throw it over to your co-host,
Daniel Delby.
And Cameron Branch.
I would do this and then I'd gong.
Free in attendance for the millions listening at home. Let's get hard.
All right, team. I am leaving early because I've got to fly to Adelaide. So if you're in Adelaide, come see me tomorrow. 33 years single.
Tomorrow?
Yep.
Oh, sick.
I've got a wicked amount of 4 sales. So come support.
That's all of our Adelaide listeners.
Yeah, fuck yeah. A shout out to Bruiser, Shane, and I think his missus' name was Tammy, but he said Handbrake at the time. Been to they went to every single show that I put on at Fringe, and they love the pod. So shout out to you guys.
Every single show. Every single show.
Every show that I did, like
that's
Ick,
fucking
Hose
commitment.
Rhyme, and 33.
I like that. That's good. Fuck yeah.
But let's kick off.
Yes. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Been a bit of back and forth, and Jordan tried to come on as well, which he's coming on, I think, in March sometime.
Good stuff.
But yeah, thanks for joining us. Maybe to start, give us a brief explanation of who you are and what you do.
Well, firstly, happy birthday. I understand it's the podcast.
Yeah, 6
birthday.
years.
Nice.
6 years today. Did you know that?
Post something. No, I saw you post something. I was like, oh, cool, nostalgia.
Oh yeah, no, 6 years today. Yeah, so
All right.
That's quite the achievement. Good
Yeah.
on you.
Yeah.
Good on you.
yeah.
Same age as Scotty?
No, she's 7.
Oh, one.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Second child.
It is actually interesting because as I watch my daughter grow, because it is very similar age, it's like watching the podcast grow,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, the same. Fuck. Holy shit. We've been going for a while.
Yeah.
But
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I'm Ryan Burns. I'm the lead candidate for the Libertarian Party in this upcoming state election. Mm-hmm. Speaking of parenthood, I'm a proud father now of nearly 3-year-old twins.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. It's been a very long journey.
So they're nearly 3, not nearly twins. So I was like, they're nearly twins. One's catching up in age.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You get because they develop so quickly. So I now understand when people delineate between the months, even because
yeah.
the rate of change is
Yeah.
so great. So,
Yeah, at what point does it go from like months?
It's 18 months.
yeah, no, it's 27 months.
1.5.
Yeah, just two
Yeah.
and a bit.
No, they're definitely twins. I was there. I was lucky enough to witness it before they booted me out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're coming up to 3 in May, and it was a long journey, a really hard journey to get them after 8 years and maybe paying off a full home.
Yeah,
could have done in that time. So, and look, professionally, I'm an engineer, mining engineer, proud West Aussie. Mm-hmm. Started up in southwest Western Australia in a small town called Boyart Brook, and then moved to Mandurah. And it was still a small country town almost, with probably only about 8,000 people there.
Yeah.
And then from there, I took a scholarship to study mining engineering out in Kalgoorlie. Mm-hmm. And
Doing all the tourist sites of WA. Mandurah, Cal.
Yeah.
well, it's a big state.
Yeah.
And from there, I was actually going to go into the Defence Forces, and in my first year, the recruiters had contacted me. I did a series of interviews, but I took the scholarship and I thought, well, I'll do that degree and then go direct entry. And the Army and the Navy approached me. It's quite the compliment because the defence budget was very, very low, and they encouraged me to apply as a pilot for them. And I thought, oh no, I want to fly jets for the Air Force. But mining has this ability to really drag you into it. And for me, it was literally it dragged me underground. So as an engineering student, you spend your holidays working and doing real mining jobs, and from there I really got a taste for it and loved doing that.
Yeah. So were you a pilot before?
No,
Or
not
they
at all.
were just like, oh, this guy looks like he can fly planes.
No, it's one of those classic stories, a train driver, astronaut. So, I got an interest in being an astronaut. Then you learn that all the astronauts are ex-US Air Force pilots. So, and that, I'm talking sort of very early primary school age. And then,
but like I had the same aspirations. I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I don't know why I didn't follow through with that.
You're just a space cadet.
It's because they don't exist.
You don't even get to go to the moon. You stay here.
I figured it out. They didn't go, so I went, oh, fuck it. But that's interesting because, like, how do you go from being in mining and, trying to be a father and stuff to going, right, I want to be a politician, and where do you find libertarian?
Well, it's a gradual thing, and when you look back, I've never been a conservative. I've always been politically aware, engaged. Like I used to take my vote very, very seriously. I was aware of the major issues, less so in state politics, mainly federal, because that's what gets the airtime.
Yep.
And it was a gradual process. And I suppose as you start to get more skin in the game, you're building a career, you're buying a home, you're starting a family. That level of awareness grows, and in a sense, I had a thirst for more information. And by then, I was typically a right of centre voter, so I just wanted more access to the politicians. I think I'd seen an event loosely where a lot of the Liberal Party politicians had come through town. I said, I'd like some advanced knowledge of that. So their values on paper very much aligned with mine at the time. So I joined the Liberal Party, not as a party hack, not with any mind of having a career in politics. And I remember, and in parallel with that, just down the road lives our federal member for Parliament, and we struck up a friendship just neighbourly. I wouldn't talk too much politics with him. He's an ex-military veteran. I love my military history. I've got over 100 books of military history, and twice been to Gallipoli, walked the Kokoda track. Every corner of the world, I'm always seeking out the Commonwealth War Graves Commission grave sites. I love the history, not so much war or anything, but just the personal stories behind it and the sacrifices. And so I volunteered. I think it was the 2019 campaign. If you remember, that was the bill we couldn't afford. Franking credits was high on the agenda of the Labor Party, as well as negative gearing. And there I was, like a lot of mining people and just aspirational people trying to get in front. I was heavily geared, so that would really have cost me, or I perceived it would. So
that's got a different meaning in Wanneroo if you're heavily geared.
Well, probably the same in Mandurah.
Come on now. I'm a local government councillor there, so I actually, it's funny because it's not a simple path. A lot of these things happen in parallel. So, but I never went into politics from a career point of view. But I volunteered at that 2019, and I thought I can do a lot more than just letterbox drop and mount a booth for a day. I've run projects, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars projects. I asked around, how do I get onto someone's campaign team so that I could contribute a bit more, and found it very interesting. And I remember the grassroots party members and the office-bearing executives for the different branches in the division, they'd sort of turn to me and said, Ryan, why don't you run as a candidate? And it was it was a penny dropping moment. I'd never considered it. With my credentials as an engineer, the fact that I had worked underground as a miner, I was trained in the old skill of air leg mining. We can talk about that a bit later.
Yeah, cool.
I'd never thought of it, but with that really good life experience, having travelled a lot, having worked overseas, I thought, it's a pretty good resume.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So,
bit more in touch with the everyday man.
I think so.
Yeah.
I've done literally backbreaking work. The handheld air leg mining stuff, it's amongst the toughest.
Yeah,
and to a degree, one of the most macho sort of professions that you could. It's physically hard, but it's intellectually challenging. You shouldn't dismiss these underground miners as being able to lift heavy things. You really got to think your way through problem solving, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. So in any case, getting back to the politics, I ran in the infamous 2021 state election. If you remember, Mark McGowan had a 90% popularity.
Oh, he hoodwinked everyone. All the fucking plebs just went, Daddy McGowan.
It
ridiculous.
It was infuriating. I've got a McGowan story too later if we have time for it.
We've always got time.
I think start with the interesting stuff and then get into the politics after.
But I ran on very local for local reasons in a safe Labor seat. So while I thought it was possible, there's what's called a candidate syndrome, something where when you start getting out in the community, you get this positive feedback bias and you think, I could actually do this. It was interesting, and it was always a small chance, but I fought it out. I learnt a lot. COVID basically put a line through that. So, arguably I might have had a 1 in 50 or a 1 in 100 chance on reflection before COVID. It turned into a 1 in a million.
Yeah.
So, but during that time, and also my evolution or my journey in understanding politics and the decisions that particularly the party that I was in, I could see there's their stated values. the We Believe statement. It's a Menzies statement, classic liberalism, which is where the Liberals get their name from, ironically. There's the stated principles and massive big Grand Canyon between their policy positions and what they do.
It out?
Yeah.
Not all miners just see something and want to dig it out.
I think that's pretty common across all politics. Hey, you say what you're going to do, and then or what you stand for, and quite often the thing they stand for is the thing they're doing against. Or like I say, I support miners, and then the reality is I'm not supporting miners.
Yeah,
like
it's
everything
that sort
they
of
say is the opposite of what they do.
It's that like survivor thing that Trump was talking about on Joe Rogan. Sometimes people have the best intentions, I think, and then they just get in and like, oh, no, I have to do what I have to just to have some sort of impact. That's why, like, I think sometimes when people don't follow through, but they do that argument of something is better than nothing, and I understand that sometimes people get in and they can't do anything. But
and that's the trouble with being one of these major parties, because you genuinely have to toe the party line. But again, in that transition, it just eats you away from inside. If you've got your own values and principles, which I was becoming more and more firm on as I read more, as I listened to more, as I thought about it more, it was soul destroying to almost stay in there. So I fought that state campaign through because a lot of people had invested in me, and you go through this self-justification process. Well, if I stay inside the tent, then I can reform from within.
Yeah.
And that's true to a certain extent, but you've really got to be true to yourself, I think, and integrity is big for me, and that word has guided me through my local government experience as a councillor. If I don't have my word and my integrity, and what I mean, it guides you. So often I'm the contrarian on our council down in Mandurah, but you have that strength of conviction. So it might be an issue where I'm only one of 13 or two of 13, yet for that issue I'm probably representing, if not a majority, a significant minority of 40%. And at times I could be representing the views of 70% of my constituents or electors, but I'm only one of 13. So that gives you that strength of conviction.
It's interesting because I think sometimes like you touched on it just there, like trying to make change from within. It seems like this romantic idea, but it never plays out. But then what choice do you have? Like, is it just not get in at all and not have an impact, even if it's minor? Or do you just stand strong in your convictions and go completely independent and go, this is what I'm doing?
And on top of that, what are some of the challenges you face? Because it's easy to say, it's not, we get inside and I want to make a change. What are the things you come up against? You're like, guys, we need to do this. Oh, we can't because we've promised this, or no, that's not an issue. Like, what happens behind closed doors?
Well, I remember early in the piece. Now, there are a lot. It's really interesting for me. I've still got a lot of good friends in the Liberal Party, particularly the grassroots, and I can honestly say they would align more to the principles and policy positions of the Libertarian Party than the Liberal Party. So they're good. They're good people. But one of the first things that I found I really struggled with is that early on as a candidate, they ask you to come up with what's called a wish list. And I get why some candidates might come up with things that are a bit silly or don't really align with the direction or the campaign policy position of the party. But I was coming up with some really good, genuine things that as a local MP you should be championing, things that make it so much better for the region you're representing and all West Australians. And one of those was, it's a bit of a pet thing for me to push through, and I'm pretty proud of that achievement. I think it wouldn't have happened, is the permanent sand bypassing down in Mandurah, where we've got the Dawesville cut and then the mouth of the estuary. And to me, as a engineer and with some materials handling expertise, I could just intuitively see this is not the way to do it, to set up a 30-ton digger and a cumbersome plant and filter and pump it, and then you just do it in.
Were doing?
Still doing it to this day.
Was it causing issues with fish deaths and the reef or something?
I don't necessarily think so, but another intuitive way to think about it is that the natural flow of sands in our area of Western Australia, the southwest is from south through to north. So I think if you, through engineering or through other built infrastructure, if you interrupt that natural flow, then I think the way to best mitigate that, we're always going to have an impact, but if you can mitigate that sort of simulates or emulates what is naturally occurring, then you're going to lessen that harm.
Yeah.
So if you had a permanent pumping system, you get to turn it on and off and sort of replicate or simulate or effectively do what would ordinarily occur naturally.
Yeah.
But I know what it costs to run a digger and that sort of machinery. I know what labour costs, and I know that. So we weren't simulating or performing what would most naturally occur.
Yeah.
But it was also costing. It'd have to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I have to be really tricky here that I don't release any confidential information.
Yeah,
and
it's all alleged.
Yeah.
Well, and being that that contrarian on council, there's a thing called the code of conduct and some regulations, and that can be used against you to kind of shut you up. And while you might not be in breach, the process is the punishment as much. So. Just formally, I do not represent the city of Mandurah or the council. These views are my own.
Yeah. The process is the punishments used in it's globally. It's you see. Look at Julian Assange, perfect example. The process and
even Trump's impeachment and then
Just
fighting the January 6th.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
Weaponisation of that, even though the outcome is fairly clear. To go through that. And I remember I can say this because I was found guilty, so that's on the public record. And I like talking about this because the pub test would have the slight offence. It was a little faux pas on social media. I think if the average punter looked at that, they would go, there's nothing wrong with that, and this is petty and frivolous, and so
what was it? Are you allowed to talk about it?
Women are dumb. Mandurah is better.
What a hole.
No, nothing like that. In fact, having that's one little interesting thing is to qualify in a sense for pre-selection for the Libertarian Party. I would have had to have said something really bad in the last 4 years for me to have been cancelled. So if you go through, because the Liberal Party, they don't do a strong vetting. They might in the background, but not formally. They've got plausible deniability. But the moment that they uncover, even if you've followed a right-wing person just for the information to be better informed, they'll quickly drop you.
Oh, so
I saw that today.
I'm fucked.
Is it Libby Madam? One of the chicks in there today went to press conference to discuss an issue, and they just brought up one of the candidates' pasts that he wrote a misogynistic post decades ago, and they were asking her about it. She's like, I don't know anything, no comment. And they just shut down the issue that she was trying to talk about. Which,
deflection.
Yeah, well, fuck. You got to. It was from 2013.
Yeah,
so
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember a previous candidate for Mandurah got cancelled pretty quickly, and one of his crimes, so to speak, was to criticise the sitting parliament at the time. Now, I reckon 90% of the Liberal Party members were off Malcolm Turnbull at the time, but anyway, the perception was bad, so they, that was one of the reasons they got rid of him, even though he'd criticised heavily. And I think, like I said, the majority of the Liberal Party members and probably parliamentarians probably agree with that sentiment now. But
so what were you guilty of there? What did you post?
It was in, I can't remember the exact post, but it was in relation to local government elections from 2 years ago. Look, I honestly got a mental blank on that, because I suppose you might be able to infer that there have been more than one. And I can say there has been more than one because the results of another type of process is minuted in the council. So,
well, it's interesting. Like even suggesting like that following someone is, because I would be considered on the right. I probably would be considered right wing by a lot of people. I try to remain neutral, but I also I follow both sides. I follow the most extreme left people because I still want to hear the other side of the argument and use it as a fuck,
Wow.
didn't think of that part, and then just try and find a happy medium. We've been talking to Pundits Politics a lot about this sort of stuff, and he disagrees with a lot of things that we talk about, but he also agrees with a lot of things, and then we both sort of having a conversation about, oh yeah, I actually didn't see that from that point of view, and then he'll be like, oh, I didn't see that from that. It's pretty.
Was this Sun Tzu, Art of War, where you got to know your enemy?
Well,
Wow.
that's
Study,
true. But also
study your opposition.
suggesting that's true as well. But also suggesting that we are in this tribalistic sort of state. I think that is a trap of just going, yeah, I'm left wing, I'm right wing. It has to be a neutral. It has to be able to go, right, if you support Labor, you have to also be able to call out Labor when they do something you disagree with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the good thing about being in the Libertarian Party, because it's not a hanging offence to be following the Greens, for example. It's just you being better informed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we'll put a pause on politics for a bit because there's some stuff that's just about yourself, which is always good. The Gallipoli trip, what was that like? I haven't been, but people that have been say it's quite quite awesome.
It's probably relevant to talk to the lead up to that. So this is really interesting because my partner will be watching this later, so I don't think I've much talked about my French ex-girlfriend.
Oh,
But
bonjour, monsieur.
Interestingly,
There's an argument coming later on tonight.
Angie's very, very clever, and every now and again my mum will talk about my ex. So she's not silly. She knows it's there in the back. We don't. We're very solid. We don't need to go into that. But I had a French girlfriend, and I completed with her the latter part of her round the world ticket, and then landed in France, and then France was my base to travel the UK. And
Did she surrender just there, or
Put up the white flag.
Look, she was a wonderful girl. It just didn't work out, as you know. But I really got almost obsessive about military. Well, I was interested in military history, even as a young high school student, a teacher. When I think about it now, she gave me her father's diaries that he took through New Guinea during that war, and it was literally covered in blood, sweat, and tears. And so that seed was always there, that interest was always there. And being in France, and hopping between the UK and France, I actually bought a heap of English. My French wasn't that good to read in French. Military history books and battlefield guides. So I am proud to say almost that I had walked the battlefields or every Australian battlefield on the Western Front, and I was only 24, turning 25. So
where were some of the most important parts? Because Normandy, did that affect the Aussies? Or that was nothing? So that was not the Battle of Normandy, or no?
No. So that was the
World War
War II.
We were the diversion from memory, weren't we?
No, so Normandy occurred in World War II against Nazi Germany. The World War I was a little bit more trickier. If you can imagine, from a front that goes from Belgium to Switzerland, and interesting, just stops there.
Yeah.
So the Australians, we went over and landed in Egypt, did some training there, and then were meant to be sent off to the battlefields on the Western Front. And then Churchill came up with that strategy of almost like a pincer movement or another battlefield or a battlefront through the Gallipoli, the Dardanelles, and then because at the time Russia was an ally, and so if they could cut off that supply, and Germany was sort of making some movements so they had some military alignment with Turkey. So Australians' first, battlefield was the Gallipoli campaign, not technically the first battlefield because that was up in New Guinea.
Yeah.
So, and then from there they went up to northern France and Belgium to hold with as part of the British forces. And so World War I was predominantly, aside from Gallipoli, it was predominantly Belgium and northern France.
Well, what happened in New Guinea? I didn't realise that was our first battlefront.
Well, the Papua New Guinea used to be you'll have to fact check me later.
Yeah,
used to be divided into Papua and New Guinea.
Yeah.
And there were some German settlements, I think, on Rabaul. So the Australians sent some ships and a small contingent of troops there to basically wrestle New Guinea off the Germans.
I had
So
no
I think-
idea about that history. Yeah.
If they had had that as a strong point, that's an easy access launch point to Australia.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, and I haven't really researched that one,
Yeah.
and most of my research is 20 years old, so it's sort of
Yeah,
now
it's
a
still
little
very
bit-
interesting.
Yeah,
no?
that's right.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting because Australia had 2 submarines, and I think one was sent up to New Guinea there, and the other one was
The
lost.
whole
in
of
Dardanelles
Australia just had 2 submarines.
back in World War One. Well, I don't think many countries had
Yeah,
a lot
fuck.
of submarines.
Well,
Yeah.
we're going to have 6 in 30 years' time with a new
Yeah.
contract.
Didn't
What a
we
waste.
already spend $3 billion on 0 submarines?
Yeah.
Or was it $6 billion? I can't remember now.
allegedly.
Well,
yeah.
the First World War was a bit of a weird one, how it started, wasn't it? It was the assassination of Franz
Franz
Ferdinand.
Yeah, so
I
he was
heard-
the heir to the Austrian Empire, and it was because that's a melting pot of conflict too. The Caucasus and that area
Yeah.
there with
Am I wrong? I may have heard this or read this recently that they tried to assassinate him,
Yes.
fucked it up,
Yes.
and then just bumped
So
into him in
Cam
the street.
McLaren told me the other night, he was like, it's got to be the best case of time travel
Yeah.
to have something occur because they tried to assassinate him and then
by using the explosives, I think at the time, and then in the end, they diverted the car, and one of the rebels or the criminals happened to be just there, and I think he shot him.
Yeah,
dead with
because
a-
it was
with a
too
pistol.
busy. So there was a street that was too busy. So they
Yeah.
went a different way and it was blocked. So then they had to do this U-turn and the bloke had failed the assassination attempt, was just getting a sandwich.
Yeah.
And because the road was blocked, they were doing a U-turn and he's just going, fucking boom. So,
Fuck.
like, he's like...
Starts a world war.
Yeah. So
That's-
he's like, if there was time travel, they would have blocked the other street, caused them to go here, done a U-turn. It's like,
And
no
what did
matter
they-
what was going to happen, this guy was going to die.
And what did they want to kill him for? Was it a retaliation to? I can't recall.
Yeah, it's such a...
It was such an unnecessary war, wasn't it?
Oh, and absolutely, the whole thing was, and
Yeah.
in the background there was German expansionistic sort of policies, but there's a whole sequence of treaties, and so Britain was drawn in because they had a treaty with now on shaky ground. I used to know this stuff so well. I
Yeah.
could sound like an academic nerd.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a whole series of different treaties, and it just one domino fell after the
Yeah.
other. But I think underlining all that was basically power grab. There were still lots of colonies out there. The French had North Africa, Germany had different elements.
Well, the modern world's kind of just starting to really kick off.
Well, this is why I like something like Anzac Day, for example. I don't know how to take that day because
we were sent to just die.
yeah, for what feels like almost corporate greed, but there's also a sense of mourning and loss for these poor kids who have gone to fight for power. They're almost told that they're fighting for to protect our freedom, and it ends up being for corporate greed and for what's realistically a fucking imaginary line in the sand.
It did stop the Nazis. Well, it didn't stop them, but like,
Yeah.
because what was it?
And I'm not suggesting that that's not.
Well, this is where I become an evangelistic libertarian. But if you research and read up the non-aggression principle, it actually sort of provides some guidance through these different conflicts to say that, and that's a libertarian principle, right? Is that you should live your life as you feel free, as you determine through your choices what's best for you, your family, and your community, as long as you don't cause harm on others. And an extension of that is the non-aggression principle. So libertarians don't just run away when they're up for a fight, but there's definitely a line there that you have a right to defend your life and your property. But beyond that, you should stay out of foreign wars, and that those two parties should come to a mutually consensual agreement.
Yeah.
So that's the non-aggression principle. So look that one up, and that might help you sort of think your way through the waste and the senselessness of a lot of these conflicts.
I mean, that just on that level, and I'm going to come back to France because I want to hear more about that. But like the non-aggression principle, there's 2 cases stick out to mind. There was one where there was a home invasion. His wife had been attacked, and he murdered or shot. It was a old farmer bloke.
Yeah.
I think in WA, and he shot the guy, and then he got done for murder when this bloke's just attacks the wife and trying to get into the house. from what I remember. But I don't remember. I'm not 100% if it was attack the wife, but like these guys trying to get into his house and he shoots him and then he goes to jail for that. And then the other one that happened in Kalgoorlie,
That happens all the time.
the guy
All the time.
fucking goes into the house with a machete, attacks
this
him
is
with a
the one,
machete,
yeah.
and then gets killed. And then the family are crying poor that the guy's been murdered, and they want don't fucking enter someone's house
Yep.
with a machete.
Yeah.
Like, and they've lived in
that one
Kalgoorlie,
stands
so it's
out.
like
That's the principle of castle law. So most libertarians believe very strongly in that because of that underlying principle that it's a fundamental right actually, is even before you get to the right for free speech and association and religion is that's where the Magna Carta and classic liberalism comes in, is the right to property.
Yeah.
And that extends to yourself as property. So castle law is a doctrine. It was interesting. I was talking to a police veteran, and he was talking about that there is sufficient laws there already to defend your life and property, and a lot of it, as long as it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And then it's all about your perception of the threat. And so he said, trust that it is a reasonable threat when someone it's dark and in the middle of the night they're in your own home, you're there standing between you and your kids. That there is so
Reasonable threat.
And I think what he was hinting at is that if it ever did happen to you, make sure you talk about how you perceive the threat.
because just the pure fact alone that you're in a house that you feel safe in with a lock on the door, and someone else that you don't know has broken through that and has entered your property, straight away you should be able to do whatever it takes to get them the fuck out of your house.
But that's where
they shouldn't be. That would cause so much trauma. Imagine the next time you go to sleep in your house knowing anybody can enter,
But that's where the non-aggression principle sort of outlines that you use whatever force necessarily to the point of protecting your rights and property. So it doesn't mean that some kid's wandering through and he's larking, he might be, pinching a few lollies or whatever it might be. You then club him to death with your cricket bat.
Correct.
That's not reasonable. You do whatever you. So
Just
I think
little
people get in trouble when they sort of, and it's not the nakedness, when they chase a guy down with a golf stick after being woken up, being naked in bed, and he's running down, and then if you then start to, perform violence on that person, then that's not reasonable because you're not defending your life, and you're actually after
chase them
retribution
down
and justice.
You become the aggressor,
That's right. So you do whatever's necessary, but
they've retreated.
There is probably, that's one of the things I get asked about that a little bit and it's something worth looking into to see if, to get rid of the greyness or the murkiness on that, to make it clear, a bit clearer. If, it may well be clear and there's a lot of misconception about, out in the public about things, so that can happen too.
And then to circle back to France is, I could be getting my wars wrong. I know very, very, very little about it. The Battle of Versailles, or is that Treaty of Versailles?
That's the Treaty of Versailles. Okay. And that was the one that was really heavily punitive and then could reasonably seen as causing World War II, because it really did decimate the German pride, the economy. So, and that's why, for example, the Americans learnt the lesson from that when they came to dealing with Japan. So they didn't overly punish Japan. Japan was, we could all agree, was fairly well punished for their aggression. But they then dedicated to rebuilding and setting up new institutions, and that's why where the Japanese became so successful. So American businesses went over there, taught.
They've fucking done a 180, haven't they?
But the Americans sort of ironically taught a lot of the business principles and all that to Japan, and Japan just sharpened them and then exported it to the world, and that became...
They're good at sharpening.
But can you imagine if they were over punitive, then there would be that sort of that resentment and that anger sitting there, and Japan might still have...
they nailed it, because Japan are the nicest culture on the planet. So whatever happened, it's turned this culture into the respectful...
Fuck, I have an idea what happened.
The most respectful, the most polite culture with the most innovation, the most coolest sort of subcultures. Whatever happened there,
and then
whatever happened.
Well,
I got two things that I think happened there.
Well, there's two things. You got to separate governments from people. Yeah, what was the second thing? I forget.
And then where was the most important battlegrounds for Aussies in France?
Well,
you were
interestingly,
visiting?
the Villers-Bretonneux was a really, that's where our big war memorial there, and that was fairly significant. That was in the latter part of the war. So the Americans were soon to enter the fray. So they had held off for a long time. They were assisting through industry and finance, I think. But it was clear that Germany had sort of Russia had solved the problem for them because they had a revolution. So Germany, similar to World War II, had the Eastern Front and the Western Front, but then there was the Russian Revolution. So that enabled the Germans then to send all their resources to the Western Front. And that all, so I think the revolution was in 1917 and thereabouts. There was a couple of little goes at it, So then German resources were set up to do this one big push, and that was sort of in 1918. And so that's why that battlefield was quite significant, because that big push in 1918 sort of ended and was disrupted or interrupted around Villers-Bretonneux, and Australia had a massive part in that. And have you guys heard of General Monash from Melbourne?
No, but I guess the university must be named after him.
Yes, and highways, and so he was a civil engineer and had pretty notable achievements outside. But he was the first general that sort of led a united Australia. We had 5 or 6 divisions over there, and so he was a general that broke a lot of the rules and worked in integration.
So an uncivil engineer.
No, he didn't break. What I mean is like the way of doing fighting well. So he like started to integrate tanks, aircrafts, artillery, and so he had some really good wins there. So he's a well worth researching.
So good tactician.
Yeah, so it all sort of pivoted or sort of ended up at that point where we had full control of the Australian forces under Australian command. You had this innovating, strong leader in Monash, so that's why that workforce, that battlefield is quite significant. There are others like Fromelles, so that only recently came into play, but it was very clear in my research that it was a significant battlefield, but there was very little there to look at or in terms of monuments.
Yeah. Was before Monash, were we dictated to by the English? So we had like English people in charge, and Monash was a groundbreaker because he was an Aussie in charge of Aussies?
Yeah, well, it depended on the type of battle and what was going on, whether it was a deflection or whether it was a part of a fall. But we were, in a sense, integrated with the British Expeditionary Force.
Yeah.
And same with the New Zealanders, Canadians. So we were
the Canadians just shoot you and then apologise.
Sorry.
When the Canadians had, and Newfoundland was a different. They have some very, very good stories there.
Is that because they're all the Mounties and they're like good at like?
They're like Australia was back then, like the way we maybe like to associate. They were frontiers and very hardy,
fearless.
So they're very good force. Same with the South Africans.
Yeah.
So you imagine out on the colonies, it's quite tough and they were very connected. They could all ride horses. They could all shoot. They could. So there's a bit about Canadians and the same. They could probably say the same about Australians, having witnessed the last few years. But back in the day,
there are a lot of parallels. I mean, back then and then what's happened to the culture recently. Because I find like Canadians and Aussies, we are quite simpatico. Like I've always bonded with Canadians in all my travels. It's the Canadians that I've always really had a connection with, and a lot of similarities. But then, that's a good point you make.
Are they still part of the Commonwealth?
So woke now, and we've come woke. Right.
So they there's a lot of, we could look across there in all parts of politics, but they have a system based on the Westminster system, similar to us. It's interesting. What do we call it? We call it the Washminster because we adopted the American Senate system, but the Westminster lower house representatives.
Like a bit of Aussie mongrel about it.
That's always is, isn't it?
Yeah. So you've gone from France to Gallipoli because you were sort of inspired, or it's just
that's right. So you're researching it. It has that cultural significance. Gallipoli. Everybody knows about Gallipoli, but I remember growing up knowing about New Guinea and Kokoda. My grandfather was a veteran of Kokoda. He was in the 2nd 16th, which is a West Australian battalion. So that was pretty interesting for me. But Gallipoli, of course, you have to go there. And my sister was working as a nurse in the UK. My parents were travelling with some good friends. They'd gone a little bit into Africa. They were coming to see me in France. So we thought a great place to meet would be to go and travel Turkey just for its culture and all those other reasons, and also take that trip down to Gallipoli, which is it's a similar to a rite of passage for Australia in a sense. So it was a wonderful trip. I was in my mid-20s, sister in her late 20s. My parents were probably the age that I am now. So it was 35. The first time I'd spent.
There must be what is it like being in that area though?
Yeah, because do you see the cliffs?
Well, yeah, what's this?
Can you see the cliffs where it was at, or is it all flat now? Or
but looking at photos now, it's a bit more developed. But when I was there in the late 90s, it was developed to a degree but it didn't seem to impose on the natural features. But we were there, so we did the trip with my parents, and we did a tour, and that's excellent. That was my regret from Kokoda, is I didn't have a battlefield guide. Okay. I was heavily researched, but we just walked it. But in Gallipoli, the first time I went there was with a tour group, my parents, and the second time, then they left and returned to Australia, or went to the UK and then returned to Australia. My sister and we travelled a bit for a month in Turkey, and then we decided to go back to Gallipoli, and it was about Remembrance Day, about the 11th of November. It was cold and bitter, and there was no one on the peninsula at all. We hardly saw anybody. So we made our way down to the beach, and I decided to
try to go up there.
Go up at like the
Just be careful how you raise your hand there.
Oh, of course. There's the pat your dog, pat your kid. Forget that area, and then call the waiter.
Yeah.
So what you did your own storming of the beach? You're a little rat to Brook.
But it was such an interesting experience because my sister, I was just climbing up there like a goat. And I'd get to a dead end and a sheer cliff, and I'd have to double back, and then I'd go this way, and that way I'd lose visibility. I couldn't tell where I was. And so then you can imagine being those troops trying to make their way to the top.
I'm just under gunfire.
Yeah. And at the same time, but it was hard enough just going there, as a young, fit bloke in the mid-20s. So I'd imagine. But it was quite good because I didn't put a lot of pressure on my sister, because you could still fall to some serious injury from these there was one section, so I was able to get a dead end, come back down, grab my sister, and we'd try a different way. And there was one section there that was on this sort of razor ridge that my sister, she actually got down almost onto her hands and knees to crawl it across. Yeah. So you can imagine that, and then snipers everywhere. And
so are you saying that women in war probably aren't?
No, just that's not a men-women thing. That was just my sister not being too comfortable with heights.
Yeah.
What's is there a sense of somberness, the history there? Is there a sense of almost eeriness?
It's interesting because I studied it so much that I was able to I'd read stories, I'd read letters, I'd read all the books. So it's interesting to see if someone else's experience is different, but you can feel it. It's the same on the battlefields on France. You can feel it. So I was wandering around there just through old trenches, not the monuments, not the formal museums. I was just going rogue through. And you're still coming. They call it the Iron Harvest in France. They still come out with thousands of tons of explosives. So you're sort of walking through these paddocks, and at the corner of a little small crossroad, there's just stacks of munition still there.
Wow.
And they used to do what they called miners, and they actually used to use miners from Australia and the UK to mine under trenches, lay a heap of explosives and let them go. There's a famous crater called La Boisselle and Messine Ridge and things like that. But you can see these old farmers, they're so blasé about it that they get these and they sometimes just roll them down into... Yeah. But then every now and again you hear of one going off that someone plows through it. So
that'd be so scary.
What's so interesting to me about specifically European history is when you go travelling through there and you go to a castle and you'll see like bullet holes and they're still there. They're not changed. They're not being repaired.
Just walk through Paris and you can see that.
Yeah, and that's...
go through America. Current day.
But obviously we don't have that history here in Australia. We don't have... But it's just... these are old, ancient structures that were far before that, and they've just been damaged because of war and stuff like that. And it's Rome, Italy, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, I was in the south of France, and there's this little village called Utel, and in the just north of Nice. And I remember just going through this ancient-looking village, and I looked down, and on these stone steps is a Roman legionnaire had just literally graffitied the steps, and it's still sitting there.
Wow.
And you read the Roman, it's clear. You read the Roman numerals, and they're
Is there
some
still
Roman
dictation?
soldier.
Yeah.
Well,
And just 69, he's got like
getting the sense of what people were feeling as well. I think I remember I was in Salzburg last year, and they had this this wall that goes all the way up this mountain, and they had checkpoints in which they had soldiers would stand there and watch guard, and you could see the whole view of what they were looking over, and it felt like 56, actually probably 80, 90 years ago, people were standing here fearing for their life, protecting this city.
residual energy.
Yeah, you could feel it, 100%.
I wonder if it's that woohoo energy or if it's self-projection or both.
Just a weird sense of just a realization of how lucky you are that you don't have to experience that now. But these were young kids. They're fucking 16, 17 years old.
You can do it from a drone and
well,
from the comfort of your own home.
And this, I don't think the next war. Hopefully, there's never another war. But the next war is never going to be hand to hand.
Well, Ukraine and Russia are trying to disprove that.
Yeah,
But they're pretty much getting.
You're seeing
drilled.
it it's turning into just drones and.
I think the next war is just not even. You wouldn't even know you're in a war. It's going to be digital, and it's
that's what it is.
Just settling in your country with spies and buying property and gas and sheep, which is what's happening.
I think
Australia.
we're in it right now.
Yeah, trying to own all of us.
Yeah,
now.
it's just I wouldn't say proxy war. It's
not even a war. It's like a slow invasion. You don't realize it's happening.
Yeah, it's as you said, digital. It's economic. That's the war.
Yeah. It's interesting to think these things have. While we've got modern technology and we're seeing things through that prism, and we've got readily available information. But I kind of think these things have been playing out for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Do you watch? Oh, sorry, go.
No, you go.
Do you watch what's going on in the world and see the parallels within local government and how people can lie, deceive, just shave face, and obviously at a lesser extent, but can you sort of see through almost the lies, I guess, that you see around the world?
There's an alarm going off for me to be careful what I say.
Yeah.
Not so at local government. I actually think that there's probably a couple of things going on that those that work within government, some of them are highly skilled and really would be better off working in the private sector. That's the libertarian coming out in me, but I think they have genuine good intent. And I wrote a piece. It was an intellectual exercise, and I thought, well, if I was to write an article for the Spectator magazine on the size of government and how I would approach a rate increase and what overlays my thinking, and it was a good exercise. And then I thought, well, I might try to get this published in the local paper. So I condensed it to one page, and admittedly, it's not the perfect sort of version of what I was trying to say, but I was trying, because it was about rate increases and the timing, and it was going out for consultation. I
chucked it in. Yeah,
it didn't get taken up by the local paper, which is no surprise. But I chucked it up on Facebook. I've lost my thread, but in terms of and in that I stated that that it's sort of natural that governments just grow and grow and grow, and that's not because people are nefarious or necessarily bad. They might believe that they want to improve the world, and they believe that that's the best way to do it. But there's also other incentives. So you've got people pursuing careers, and if they want to do better, then they can do more with it rather than a small budget with a staff of 3. They want a staff of 20 and a large budget. So this is just the natural incentives that
travel paid for by other people.
So in terms of bad or corruption or nefarious, look, I'm sure it goes along somewhere at some level, but in my local government, I don't believe that's the case. It's probably more that they believe this is the best way.
Yeah, I truly believe.
And I disagree with them.
Yeah. I truly believe that inherently most people are Most people. There are psychopaths, but most people are inherently good, and they inherently want the best for the world.
I just think over-regulation is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Getting into government, putting in more and more rules and stipulations and rules and mandates and fucking, we can't do this and got to apply for this process.
And some people believe
Common
the opposite.
sense.
They think, no, we need to stop that to stop the bad people. And
But it's all about sort of perverse incentives. And again, sorry to talk libertarianism, but it is sort of my world at the moment. But there can be bad outcomes with good intentions.
Yeah,
Have
for
you guys
sure.
ever heard of the Indian snake story? So the British colony, the British rulers of that colony, they perceived there was a snake problem with cobras.
Yeah, this is a great story.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah.
I haven't
tell
heard
it. Yeah.
So they devised a scheme where they would pay local Indians to catch snakes and kill them. And they would pay them a small amount for it. But so that's government interventionism. What inevitably happened is some clever Indians thought, well, we'll start breeding snakes and then take them to the British for money. And so this started to happen, and then the British said, hang on a sec, this is not the intended outcome that we wanted. So they stopped paying someone. So the Indians who had been breeding these, hundreds and thousands of snakes, they just released them into the wild. So at the end of it, they had a snake problem of X amount of snakes.
Yeah.
And at the end of their intervention, they ended up with this so much bigger problem with snakes.
Yeah. So sometimes, and we see it all the time. The intervention actually can make it worse.
Well, the cane toads is the Aussie example of that.
Yeah, but more so, I was listening to your Rebecca Barnett podcast, and late into that, she talked, and this is one of my interests. It's not a formal campaign position, but one of my interests is having our choices taken away from us. And you were talking about food security and good foods and getting rid of, being in control of where you source your own food from. So I'm sure there are some bureaucrats there that want animals treated humanely. They don't want people getting crook from poor hygiene habits. So they regulate and over-regulate. And that ends up getting rid of the competition. It ends up favouring those large abattoirs, for example, and removes the smaller niche abattoirs from the market by driving their costs up so much. They don't have the economies of scale. So the end result is that we have our choices diminished, and that direct access.
Isn't it weird how just society works like that? You have this great idea and you put it into practice and it throws up the complete opposite of what you wanted.
Well, it's like
the mandates, I remember even the vaccines, which I don't want to talk about too much at all.
Yeah.
But I remember saying, fuck man, just create a vaccine so we're done. I was all for it.
Yeah,
let's get it done. And then what has happened from that good intention that we want to solve this issue, that was probably a non-issue to begin with, has destroyed even more lives and had more damage to society than you could
small
have
business, everything.
have ever imagined.
But you're right, and that was sort of when it was occurring, you could see that happening.
I think whether or not if it was by design or just by sheer ignorance and
Like George
our own
Carlin
incompetence.
says that. He says you don't need a conspiracy when like-minded or interests align. But we are early on. I took strong opposition to it, in the sense from that that this stuff should not be mandated and that. So again, I think you've spoken at length with Malcolm Roberts recently, so we don't necessarily need to cover that. But I was right on it. I lost my job as an engineer because of the mandates. Ange was 4 months pregnant at the time. I think I get emotional, but it's my proudest achievement was to protect them through that time. But I was also, because of that interest in politics and because of that more increase in the economy, because the economy underpins everything, I think more of our leaders need to understand economical principles a lot more, and we get better decisions, because it's through a robust and healthy economy that we can pay for those public services, that people get to pursue their lives and their aspirations.
It's very interesting.
But that was shouted down. The economists, like I think her name is Gigi Forster, she was saying this is going to cause more harm than good. She wasn't talking about health; that was not her expertise, but the economy. And we are still paying that now now,
big time
through inflation. I think if most people understood where inflation comes from and how our savings and our money is devalued through the manipulation by the Fed reserves and central banking system. I'm not calling for violence, but I'm sure there would be violence in the street if they only knew how much impact this inflation is having.
Especially with the new laws that you're not allowed to speak out or be reckless with your speech. So
we have to be very cautious now. But it's quite scary when you have situations like that, and then you want to vocalise your opposing of the interventions that they're trying to mandate, and then we can now be potentially thrown in jail with some of the laws that have been rushed through.
Yeah,
it's pretty scary. And I actually had to have this conversation the other day with my partner and just say,
I'm not his partner.
I had this conversation.
He put his thumb towards me on
business
the camera.
partner.
Business partner. Yeah. I had to have this conversation with my partner, and I've had this conversation with Delby as well. Like, I have a kid. What if I was to say something reckless? What's deemed to be reckless in their terms that they've put in this new law? Political opinion is under these laws,
which is disgusting.
It's ridiculous. What if I get sent to jail for a mandatory 1 year for vocalising my opposition to what the state deems to be the right decisions? Like that's scary.
And that freedom of speech argument is so important, and that's why I'm sort of proud to. So I don't necessarily want to always conflate libertarianism with our party, but our party is very, very strict and steadfast to those principles. And so early on in the pandemic response, libertarians were very, very clear, no, this is not the right way, and were obviously proven correct. And that's why I find it difficult listening to other politicians and reading and seeing their policies, is that the Liberals and to a lesser degree the other centre-right parties, they tend to think, well, if only we elect the right people and we make the right rules, then we'll get the better outcomes. But inevitably, someone else gets to control the big behemoth of government, and they get to use their laws for what they need. So
and they put the rules in, and they don't abide to it themselves.
Yeah, well,
they put the rules in play that don't affect them because they're in a position of power.
Yeah,
and they don't have to do what the rest of the public do.
Misinformation bill, perfect example. It wasn't going to apply to the government itself and mainstream media.
And that went on. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm inside that circle, but I. In and around the freedom movement, particularly not so much statewide, but definitely locally. And there are some people there that have, rightfully so, natural scepticism toward political parties and the system, and they almost say, well, not to vote or not to participate. And one of my winning arguments is to say, you realise these laws are going to be put in place to control Joe Public on the street, but they always exempt their politicians. So don't you want a politician who stands steadfast to those principles inside the tent, able to make that argument for you, and then also oppose the legislation as it comes through, but also help shift that Overton window so that people are hearing new information. It's not necessary. It'd be tough to get it out there if the platforms are censoring it. But at least you have that voice.
Yeah.
100. But I've got two questions.
Get them out before you go.
The Overton window, that's been brought up a few times. Could you explain for the layman what that means?
And to me.
Because I remember the Overton window is like it's public perception of an issue that's negative or positive, and it slowly changes. Is that right?
This is where I think it was Einstein who said, if you can't explain it to a 7-year-old, you don't truly understand it. So for those 7-year-olds listening to your podcast, firstly, don't listen to the swearing. In simple terms, if I could, and I'm not the best person to explain it, but it is the Overton window is the the line to which it is publicly acceptable to talk about an issue.
right.
So I think an example is maybe 5 years ago when it came to transgender issues that ordinarily Australians and people around the world were very uncomfortable, and the conversations might have been happening behind closed doors in families or in the trusted places at work about what they felt, but it was very, very difficult to talk about issues that there are only two genders, male and female, which I uphold. And in terms of those issues, it was uncomfortable to have those discussions in the public. Well, I feel the Overton window has shifted now that I feel comfortable enough without self-censoring to say what I think. As long I've even stopped prefacing it with all people should be treated with respect and that people should be free to live their life as they choose as long as they don't harm others. I don't even preface that statement anymore because the Overton window has now shifted so that I feel comfortable enough.
That it's very obvious that that's what you would think anyway. Yeah.
That's right. But, while there are other people who disagree with that, and I respect it, but the majority of people thought one way, but they felt they were outside that window. And that's a good thing about minor parties and independence, is that one of our roles is to shift that window because the major parties don't want to take the risk. And I'm somewhat sympathetic, and tiny little bit for those that are listening and not watching, that they are out there trying to earn is too generous, to win the votes of 50% of the population plus one. So they're not going to be leaders on this sort of thing. And we need leaders across all levels of society to play that role. But the major parties aren't going to take that risk.
I mean, as sad as it sounds now, so essentially Overton Windows, things you say to your mates but are too afraid to say in public. So it covers all the icky, gross subjects that if you have an opinion, you can be labelled.
You would self-censor yourself.
An ist. So you say this, you're racist. Say this, you're a misogynist. Say this, you're transphobic, or whatever. So the issue that's probably most current is the Welcome to Country being scrapped.
Is it being scrapped, is it?
A lot of states and events are scrapping the Welcome to Country because an Aboriginal group spoke out against it. And said this is a cash grab and that doesn't represent our people. They had a Welcome to Country on their land from someone that wasn't part of their language group.
It's losing its meaning.
So they've spoken out, and that's
you're diluting a very again. It was a good idea. Like
not only is it losing its meaning, it's in somewhat having the opposite effect. So it's dividing Australians, it's dividing Indigenous Australians, and it's dividing all Australians. So I was pretty strong. When I mean strong, not overly strong, but. I've been pretty firm, let's say, on the Welcome to Countries. I was the only councillor to vote against our policy when it came up. The policy was well overdue, but I feel the only reason that policy came up was because I made it an issue. I did an investigation into the Welcome to Country spending, and I feel I understand there could be one reasonable explanation is that these directors were busy on what they regarded as high priority. So I ended up doing the research myself and found that we, in my interpretation of the policy, that we were overspending on that we were paying for Welcome to Countries for small events or small occasions that didn't comply with the policy. So I sort of pushed that forward, that it was brought forward, but if you look through my local government Facebook page, you can see that I'll post articles from the Aboriginal academic Anthony Dillon. I think he's from Northern Australia, but operates out of a Victorian-based university. But he wrote an article criticising Welcome to Country, not saying that it should not be done, but it's being overdone and that it's having the opposite effect. And so in terms of courage, you could criticise me for not being that courageous, but I think it was politically expedient rather than me rant about it. Very perfectly valid, well thought out
points,
reasoning. But it was just easier. There was an Indigenous respected academic who shared my views, and I would post that.
I like it for the big events. I like that it has job creation for our First Nations people as well. But I don't like the saturation because it does take away.
It's
takes away. If you're having a business conference.
Yeah.
And you'd all welcome. It's like, well,
I love it. I love the cultural performance.
Yeah, fucking oath,
and
yeah.
I think, but it's
beautiful.
It is. But
Especially the big AFL games where they have a big
which I'm going to Dreamtime this year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
tickets,
That'll be
yes,
sick.
yeah.
But those big events.
Yeah.
It is a really good
And it's a
moment.
good way
it is. But
to
when
connect
it's
to.
every fucking thing you go to, you're like, you're ruining a good. You are ruining a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's
But the AFL, I mean, there is an argument to say that they have captured Australian rules, but the AFL should be free to conduct their games as they are, and in a free market, we would, grow the waffle so it took over the AFL.
Please, that would be lovely.
But I think
not-
we
not
draw
for
the
Peel, fuck
line.
Peel, sorry.
We won't go there. Well, maybe later. But that's where Jacinta and
That's
Price.
also the tourism slogan.
Fuck Peel.
We won't go there. Maybe later.
Jeez,
Sorry, I had to jump in there.
I led with my chin on that one. Didn't I?
Sorry, kid. Sorry. Yeah. So Jacinta.
Nabajimpa Price, she has long spoken about the government expenditure on that. So that's where you draw the line. You can say, well, individuals and community groups and private enterprise.
Yeah,
could
businesses
be free
can do
to-
what they want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but where you can draw the line is it defendable to, through compulsion, take other people's money and spend it there, particularly if it's divisive or doesn't have the value.
Yeah. Speaking of value and money, you brought it up before that you think that you mentioned the economy and the economist lady, and then someone else who would be better in the private sector, but they're in the government. Essentially, don't we just need professional economists working in the government? Would it not be better taxpayer-funded money to lift the amount of money that it's going to cost to take economists and business experts out of private business and into government? Because I see all the issues that we have with our government spending is because they're just normal people that are ministers that have no fucking idea about how the economy works.
Surely they have
Like,
people that help them with that.
Because you can make more money. If I'm great at business and economy,
That's
I'll
just
go
an
work for a
assumption.
big company.
Yeah. That's just an assumption I'm making that they have help. But you're right.
Well,
What's the go there?
We've got the Prime Minister on $500,000 or $600,000 a year, and his direct reports are on $1 million a year. But it's really interesting. There's the argument about who really runs the country. So we do have elected. Look, I'm absolutely a supporter of democracy and that we can vote those rat bags out. But there's Trump's exposing it now, this deep state. And I'm sure it's happening at a level in Australia. And I'm not talking about corruption. I'm talking about incentives.
Yeah.
Like Charlie Munger, I think Berkshire Hathaway, the business partner of the the Oracle from Omaha. But he says, show me the incentive and I'll tell you the outcome. So there is some thought and theory about who's really running it. And it's interesting, you hear stories about, for example, a new minister gets very competent. He might actually be a lawyer or an economist or a business person who has commitment to the public, has a strategy and a policy and a direction, and that they can be sort of roadblocked at every turn by the bureaucracy. And if that minister is a very strong one, then that department just waits him out for the next electoral cycle.
Yeah.
So you've got a whole class of bureaucrats that aren't connected to the communities they're representing, that aren't necessarily or probably aren't being held to account.
Because they're representing big business interest as opposed to our...
They might be.
They're not
Well,
in
they've got
touch
their
with
own
the common man,
agenda.
they'll be.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they might have their own agenda, and so they might have that, or their view of the world. They might share the same values. We want Australia to prosper. We want to be free and open society, but their belief structure around those values are very different into how to obtain those outcomes. So, look, there's that. There is that argument, but that's the same. I'm a project manager. I've run some pretty high risk.
Talk to me about dogleg mining because I got to shoot off in a sec. And that just I was like, what is that? Is it leg dog leg?
No,
you said?
air leg.
Dog? Air
So
leg?
air leg
is there any dog in there? Air leg.
No.
What about that? Where's dog?
I'm just a dumb dog.
Same dog, different leg.
Yeah,
action.
that's it.
No, an air leg. If you can imagine, So have you ever seen footage of those pneumatic, hard-hitting, big, heavy drills that and the guys have got the cap lamp and they're up close and front to the rock face and the backs, or the roof, as coal miners call it. And there is a telescopic, pneumatic-driven leg, and that it holds up the drill so that you're not lifting it. This, I can't remember the weight, but it's friggin' heavy.
Yeah.
And so, but the more skilled, and as you train, so when you're learning, you're wrestling it, and it really is heavy and hard, and it's quite dangerous to learn if you're not being properly trained. And the air leg refers to the leg that supports the drill, and then so it is sort of the evolution of mining. It was probably the predominant mining method through the 50s and 60s
So
and
what,
70s.
the pneumatic just shoots repeatedly into the wall?
No,
cracks the
it
thing?
holds up. It's like this floating. So if you imagine on these, like the gas arms of your thing, if you imagine that at a big steel cylinder, and they've got a couple of stages. They've got 2 stages. So the air leg might be like a metre and a half tall. Can't remember about that. And when you're drilling holes, so you might be drilling a hole that is 2 metres above you, so you can reach it from your shoulder height because you've got a 2 metre steel drill rod.
Yeah.
We call it a steel, believe it or not. And as you are drilling, so it's the drill rotates the drill rod and it strikes it. And so that at the end there's a bit, it might be just like a chisel or a cross bit.
Yeah.
And so it strikes, chips the rock, turns slightly, strikes, chips the rock. And that's how you drill through the rock. But obviously when you start out, you're 2 metres away, and by the time the hole is completed, your drill is 2 metres away because you're drilling at full length. And so this telescopic pneumatic leg holds the drill up even when you can't reach it.
That's pretty cool.
So, but the point of it's hard physical work, and I mean, I've worked underground in following gold veins in what we call stopes, so narrow that I couldn't even stand square in them, like in sections of that.
What's the insurances? Because that sounds scary as fuck to me. Being in a canyon where you can't turn straight.
Yeah,
Is there danger money, or you just
when I regrettably think back, if we were to plot a graph of how well paid air leg miners was, it's like when I bought my property. I wasn't, I bought it. I wasn't the peak of the boom, but it was a day either side. So in a negative aspect, we weren't that well. But it was for a young guy in his early 20s, where the other guys who I graduated with might have been working for the big mining houses in offices, earning at the time, maybe 40 or 50 grand, and I was on 80, 90.
Yeah.
But so it's hard physical labour.
Yeah.
It is hazardous. You shouldn't really say dangerous, because if you know what you're saying, then you control those risks. But there was a lot of fatalities associated with that style of mining.
Wow.
And
You talk about feeling. I remember I was an underground manager at a mine in Cambalda, and I wasn't manager, but it was within a year or two before they'd had a fatality, unfortunately, and the air leg miner had been killed by a rock, and he was bolting up or supporting the ground. And when you go into that area, I swear it wasn't projection. You can feel it. He was a very well liked, very competent, but even still, you can have a bad day or not assess the risk properly,
or just a complete accident can occur.
That's right. Yeah. So, but it is. So you're always reminded of that. I had an expression in my own mind. If you imagine a cricketer sitting there, and you could actually see them mouth it because the footage of modern television watching cricket is so clear.
Yeah.
And then they're mouthing, watch the ball, watch the ball, watch the ball, watch the ball. I had this sort of mantra or thing, is what can bite me now? So you were always just constantly assessing the risk. Yeah. If I go here, if I tread here, if I do this, if I don't put a bolt there, what can bite me? That's just an expression about what can kill you, basically.
Directly transferable to politics.
Yeah.
So,
or just life, really. We're always assessing risks.
Yeah.
But but it's a really, it tests you, and there's that intellectual challenge. So the best miners were the sharpest of people. Like I learned that very early, and I enjoy it even now when I pigeonhole someone in all walks of life. And I'm not saying I'm being unreasonable. We all make certain judgments. The challenge is not to remain steadfast in that judgment of someone. But I remember early on, you associated these guys being able to lift heavy things, and you almost put them on a pedestal because they're the highest paid guys in the mine. They're the ones who have done all the jobs before and have earned that right to get that high earning job. But
You got to be switched on together.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So there's the physical aspect, and then assessing the risks all the time. But it's also about how to, because a lot of the time you're breaking, you drill the hole yourself. So you support the ground so it doesn't fall in on you. You drill the hole yourself, and then you charge it with explosives, and there's nothing more satisfying. And I was lucky to be in that era where we used to blast our work for the end of the day, and we were using det cord. Fuses. So nowadays, because of the accidents, because of the modern mining technique, everyone is vacated from the mine when you're letting the explosives go. But back in those days,
You light a fuse. And
yeah,
get
yeah.
legs.
As long as yeah. So you literally do, and sometimes I admit this. So it's probably the What is the
Statutory deck.
the statutory time where I can be prosecuted.
Limitations,
But I remember as a young bloke
Allegedly.
cutting. Let's say allegedly cutting the fuse to the shortest legally length, and you've just worked your backside off for 10 hours. And then there was nothing more satisfying than feeling that percussion hitting the back of your neck as you're walking away. And so that's a job well done.
Speaking of walking away, I got to run.
Yeah, we'll pause for a second and I'll rearrange the thing. Good luck, Delby. Enjoy Fringe, mate. And we're back. Delby's gone off to Fringe. But, we have got you on, obviously, to talk politics as well. You're representing the Libertarian Party. What I'm interested in is what the Libertarians actually are really sort of standing for, and what separates them from the rest, really.
Yeah, I have touched on what a libertarian is. In a sense, the basic principle is that libertarians believe that you should be able to live your life as you choose, make your choices as you see fit, as long as you don't harm others.
Yeah.
So it's with that principle and extensions of that the Libertarian Party is very, very committed to. So we're not like the other parties you hear about where we have to toe the party line. Essentially what differentiates us is that really firm principle behind what we stand by and what we will be held to account, not only by the people that voted for us, but within the party itself. And so we, in a sense, every vote of ours would be a conscience vote. As long as you can stand by your decision from a libertarian point of view, then you're free to vote in accordance with that. So that's one of the points of difference. So early on, I think in the pandemic, the libertarians naturally, because of those principles, stood firm on libertarian principles against the mandates and the lockdowns. Other parties, by their own admission, got that wrong and then stood firm. So there are other minor parties on the right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think even Malcolm Robertson, I apologise if I'm mischaracterising that, but even he said for the first 2 or 3 months, because he referenced in your podcast, and I've heard him say it in others, the footage from China, the footage from Italy, and then they thought this is a really serious thing. Now, interestingly, Malcolm Roberts is a mining engineer like me, and I've got my local government experience or as sort of evidence of how I approach it. Very facts driven. That's engineers. We're very facts driven, very data driven, and so. But getting back to the principles, even putting all the health arguments aside, which we don't need to go into, just on those principles that it should be voluntary, that if something is so bad and the response to it so good, you don't need to force people to do that.
Yeah.
And so those libertarian values underpin everything that we do and what we stand for. Now, and then there's not always a consensus position on libertarian things, but as long as an individual you adopt that principled approach, then you should be right.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting and we touched on this off mic, was the fact that the media won't cover it. This whole getting independents and smaller parties and lesser parties into power or positions of power to have an impact. Why aren't they covering it? Are they aligned? Pretend I don't know the answer.
Well, I think to cut them some slack, it is fair to report who will form government. So the focus can very much be on the lower houses. So in Western Australian Parliament, that's called the Legislative Assembly, or LA, as the WA Electoral Commission initialises it. And that's called the House of Representatives in our federal parliament. So naturally, who forms government is the main story. But our system works, it's bicameral, which means it's got two chambers. So we've got the lower houses writing the laws and the upper houses passing the laws or rejecting them or amending them and sending them back down. So the key issue then is who holds the balance of power in the upper house. So if we've gone through the last 4 years, I think it hadn't happened for over 100 years. In any case, it's very, very rare for someone to form government by having more seats in the lower house and also control the upper house. So Trump, I think, effectively has that. Their system is very different. They've got a presidential system, but he now controls both houses as best as I understand it. We had that with the McGowan win of 2021. And the danger of that is that review, that democratic process isn't adhered to, that whoever controls both houses doesn't need to really communicate that to the community, doesn't need to consult with the community or other politicians. That they can basically pass anything they want, and they can have the ability to just run stuff through without the proper accountability or review.
Which should concern anyone, regardless of whether you're a Roger Cook supporter or not,
of
or
course,
a Labor supporter or a Liberal supporter or whatever you are. Having that sort of power, and as Simone Springer said, as member of the Greens a couple of days ago, no one should have that much power. No one. And
I talk to, let's say, if you're Team Red, don't you want your team performing at its best? And it doesn't perform at its best if it's not challenged and if it's not tested. But if you can poorly conceive legislation and then just ram it through. We saw what they did with the heritage laws. That's an example of really bad legislation that infringed on the rights of people, that wasn't workable, that was very costly, just from a governance point of view. And it was rightfully rejected by the people. That's still sitting on the books as best as I can understand it.
Fuck.
So that is one of the outcomes of controlling both of those. So when it comes to the minor parties, I think it's better to perhaps use the federal politics. It could confuse some people, but so you always hear of the Greens or the Jackie Lambies, or you know them, those ones that the government needs to woo to get across the line to have their laws passed, and that's called the balance of power.
Yeah, so it's super important that, especially in this upcoming, specifically for at the moment, locally WA, but in the federal as well, to make sure they're voting for the lesser parties as long as they believe in those principles.
Yeah, that's right. And so we hear this term, the uni party. So I have this phrase, it's adopted from a Northern Hemisphere political phrase, but I'll Australianise it, that sorry to my good friends, the Liberal Party are really just Labor driving the speed limit.
Yeah, okay.
And so that analogy is basically that the two major parties are on the same road, heading in the same direction to the same destination. But the Liberals are just doing it a little bit more slower. And so I think there's a very, very solid place for minor parties to hold that balance of power so that you are prosecuting alternative viewpoints. And I'm sure it happens. I don't have any receipts to back it up, but I'm sure the major parties get together on things that they align with. And if you look at just the electoral system and reform, so not many people know, but if you're a party that gets above 4% of the vote, you get refunded a dollar figure for each of those votes. So it's the major parties their vote is dropping as the years go. People are moving away from the major parties for good reason.
Which
but
everyone can agree is a good thing.
Yeah, but I've heard it said that they could bank a certain amount of votes, and therefore that they can borrow against what they are likely to get returned to fund their campaigns. If you look at our party, we've been around since 2001 for 24 years, and we were formerly known the Liberal Democrats. So an example of that is that Labor and Liberal at a federal level got together and changed the rules, which effectively banned the Liberal Democrats from using the word Liberal in their name. Now, that was contested right through to the High Court, I think, and we narrowly lost, and therefore we pivoted to embrace the new name, which I think we threw our money away by contesting it, because I think it's a much better name.
Yeah.
But that's an example of how, and I think the recent suite of changes in electoral funding were targeted at the Clive Palmers of the world and the Climate 200, Simon Holmes a court-backed so-called independents. They're functioning effectively as a party, in my opinion. I hope those guys have got big bank balances, so I'd hate to see any defamation or anything coming from that statement.
Yeah.
It's well repeated on X, so let me say it has been reported, or it is commonly said, but that's a new tranche of regulatory reform that is all designed at stamping out competition. Like we said earlier on, you might have good intention, but I think not so. So a lot of these laws are put in place to benefit the major parties. And if you look at just recently, this is very, very topical when we were talking about minor parties and the role that they are probably, not potentially, probably going to play in this next state election and state parliament after the election. They will play a significant role because of, ironically, the reforms that Mark McGowan committed to on no less than 4 or 6 times during an ABC interview, believe it or not, Labor being pressed by the ABC. That electoral reform was not on his agenda. And within weeks or months of winning both houses, he changed the electoral system. So in Western Australia, prior to that, we used to have 6 regions. And that equated to very strong regional representation because one vote wasn't worth one value. So on the surface you think, every vote should be equal. But what that means is that it tends to centralise control, and government does not work best under centralised control. But in other words, you're better represented from those that are closest to those that they're representing. Did I make sense then?
Yeah.
So interestingly, in the past you might have needed, for each of those 6 regions, you might have needed 14% of the vote. Now it is statewide. So to vote for me in the upper house as the lead candidate for the Libertarians, you could be anywhere in Western Australia now, not just in the southwest region or mining and pastoral or agriculture.
Okay.
So it is now a statewide vote. They added another parliamentarian to the upper house, so they went from 36 to 37. So the quota effectively becomes just over 2.5%. 2.63%. So it makes it, ironically, very achievable to get at least one member of parliament or more if you're a larger minor party into the upper house. But I think what happened initially was that McGowan deregistered all the parties and made it incredibly difficult to re-register, and even more so for the minor parties. But having done that, having been registered, there's only now on the upper house ballot, I think 13 groups. So it is very, very achievable. And I suppose my beef is, aside from the story who's going to form government by winning the most seat in the legislative assembly, is who's going to hold the balance of power and what does the balance look like in the upper house? And that's not being reported.
Yeah.
And as a minor party, it's very, very difficult.
Because as it stands, they have almost there's almost none in opposition. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, Labor hold currently 53 of the 59 seats and a significant majority in the upper house. So in the lower house, there's 59 seats of parliament.
Yep.
I can't think for now how many in the upper house, but it's comfortably a majority that they could afford to have a few not even in parliament and still win the votes.
Wow.
So it'd be really, and there's going to be a natural swing back away from Labor. That
Yeah.
that era, that pandemic response era, that word unprecedented, it was kind of unprecedented.
Yeah.
So we're going to see a natural swing back, and our hope, and I think it's reasonable thinking to think that with the overarching trend that people are moving away from the major parties. I think in days gone, the major parties might have had, Greens, Labor had 40% of the vote on the left, and the Liberal National Coalition had 40% of the vote on the right, and elections were won by that 20 in the middle. Well, now that's nearly doubled now. I think Albanese got elected with a primary vote of just over 30%, something like 32 or 33% primary vote. So that trend is moving away from the majors, I think for a good reason.
Yeah.
Because they're almost indistinguishable at times.
Of course. They're definitely, where someone put up a meme, it was, they're just a chameleon. They're just the same. They just change colour.
Yeah, there's the different cheeks from the same backside type derogatory term for it.
Yeah, I think that's what two cheeks of the same arsehole.
you can say that. Yeah. I promised, and even if I talk underground mining, I'll try not to drop so many swear words. But for all those miners out there, I can swear with the best of you. Don't get me wrong.
No, you've done very well. But it is very concerning when the balance of power is so heavily swayed either way, whether or not, even if you are a Labor supporter, for example, it should concern you. And of
course,
I'm very happy to see that swing. That's what we're doing now. Like we had the Greens on 2 days ago, Libertarians on today. I want to continue to showcase the minor parties because it is essential that we have that balance of power a bit more evenly balanced.
Because it's about bringing accountability for the decisions that they're making there. And then the role of also shifting that window of what's acceptable to say and what isn't.
Well, it leaves it open to laziness because they'll be like, yeah, we've done enough looking into this. Yep, that's going to be pretty good. Things like that just they scare me. And if you get the wrong person, just the one wrong person trying to do something, which they probably still do deem they're doing the best. If there's no one to challenge them on it and go, well, did you think of this? And we don't agree with this part of the policy. And I would hope that most of the time when these people are challenged like that, they would look at it and go, oh, actually, you're correct. Let's actually go back and reform this and make it a little better. But yeah, if we're not challenging that.
And from my point of view, this is not just campaign rhetoric. I've lived it for nearly the last 4 years on council. So while I might very much be on the minority, I test and challenge what is being presented and can make, in the background, can make some very positive changes to what is coming forward. Even if I continue to vote against it, I think the outcome for the majority of people is better for me being that antagonist, that challenger.
Yeah.
I've heard it said from those directors in the city of Mandurah that they at times have a Councillor Burns test. So they'll sit there in their leadership group and then they'll ask, right, so with this policy coming forward, what do we anticipate Councillor Burns to take exception to? And but that's a positive thing because that's that balance and that representation. So that's real. It's not even an analogy. That's the bureaucracy doing what they think is best. Technically should be under the strategies and policies and budget that is set by the elected members.
Well,
and they're applying that, but there's always a bias or there's always other incentives, and so that's the elected member's role. So, and you don't need to be a subject matter expert. You just need to learn how to ask the right questions, and it helps to be across the detail, and it does help to be a subject. When I'm talking contracts and negotiations, and I'm not a civil engineer, but you can apply those. I've supervised civil projects, so I can challenge that a little bit more. So, but that's the role of the voter. The voter needs to take some very careful consideration of the capabilities and capacity of the people they're voting for, not just because they are nice and give hugs to you when you meet them out in public.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes, and I question myself sometimes because I vocally oppose a lot of what we would deem to be tyrannical decisions that seem to be coming in lately. Do you think sometimes, and I'm just trying to almost play devil's advocate, do you think sometimes we are too pessimistic and instead of being optimistic that these laws are going to be used for the good idea that they're generally usually placed there for, we always see the potential for abuse? And do you think maybe sometimes we're just being too pessimistic? Maybe we're looking into it too deeply on how it can be abused, and the fear of oppression sometimes could actually undermine what is essentially a good idea. I'm starting to question myself at times.
That's self-reflection. That's good. You got to challenge. Why am I viewing this?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think I think rather than pessimistic, I would view it from skepticisms.
Yeah.
I don't think we're skeptical enough, and we don't challenge enough. Mm-hmm. And history dictates that like when it's the boiling frog syndrome. It's this general creep. It's this. So there's all the economical, the rules, the regulations, stifling choice, stifling competition, but it's also equally so our freedoms and what underpins our democracy and our society. I don't think we're sceptical enough. One of the classics was where the Liberal Party at a federal level introduced those foreign interference laws. And it was ironical that the first people prosecuted was the gentleman who was doing the CPAC Australia and Tony Abbott. So it was through a Liberal coalition government that wrote the rules, and the first people it was used against was Tony Abbott. It was so I think, and you've just got to look at the incentives. If you allow government through regulation and size and budget to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, the incentives to control that become way more, and that's what. And so I haven't been to Canberra for many years, but there are just behemoth buildings there from all these companies that have no direct business. Why are they even in Canberra? Because the lobbyists and the big business groups are there to influence the decision makers. But if those decision makers were very limited, and by limited I'm talking size as well as scope of what they can do, then the incentive to control that or steer it in the wrong direction away from the interests of ordinary Australians or Western Australians becomes a lot less. And that, I think that's what distinguishes the Libertarians over other parties, is that we just think that you are better off with a limited government, that people know what's right for them, and we have, I think, sometimes more faith in humanity, talking about optimism and pessimism. We're more optimistic that people inevitably will do what's best for their whole of community.
Well, I'm obviously playing a bit of devil's advocate there just to make sure that we do cover the bases and we do question ourselves and have a bit of self-reflection, because I think that's very important. But I am optimistic that the people have... I think they're smart enough to govern themselves almost to a point. I understand there's idiots and there's fucking narcissists and there's psychopaths around there, but they're the very small minority of people. Overwhelmingly, the majority of people all want the same thing. They all want society to function as peaceful and kind and compassionate as possible. We want everyone to be happy, and I truly believe that as a collective, that's what we want. That doesn't mean there aren't outliers that want to control. They want power. But yeah, I guess I am optimistic as to the direction that we're seeing the shift in regards to you make a point, like the correction is there. We're starting to see the major parties aren't getting the vast majority of the vote, 30%, whatever you made reference. That's not much. It's only 30% of the vote.
Yeah, so let's call it a third. So there's a third on the left, a third on the right, and there's a third in the middle. And
that's where it comes into like this division between the quote unquote minor freedom parties, all sort of battling each other. Is there like is there room for like this sort of united front in which all of the minor parties can sort of come together, or is that just another way to potentially see more of that same? I guess more options is better, isn't it?
Yeah. If you go back through Jordan Ditloff, he's our hard-working lead Senate candidate for Victoria, and I think recently he posted, because we hear that all the time. You know, UAP, One Nation, Libertarians have got to work together. You know, and I suppose that has come more to the forefront with the success of the Reform Party in the UK. So there was that fringe.
Yeah.
Sort of, it had its origins with Nigel Farage and Brexit, and he is now polling more than the Conservative Party or our version of the Liberals in the UK. So he all of a sudden it's just opened right up. They have a whole different voting system. That's why it's not necessarily directly applicable here.
Yeah.
So people see that and say, why can't you guys, with those freedom-based principles, unite and challenge the Liberal Party and their coalition with the Nationals? It's a different system. We can have positive influence because of our two chambers of government. But but getting back to Jordan, he did propose some sort of treaty is not the right word, but some sort of arrangement where, let's say One Nation, I don't know what it was specifically, so you'd have to look it up. But One Nation, obviously with their origins in Queensland, could have that other minor parties wouldn't contest necessarily One Nation in Queensland, and wherever it was, the other minor party in New South Wales and the other one in Victoria, and work together about getting that representation. So it's not about following each other and agreeing on policies, but you've got to get that platform. Yeah. And if you've got senators with that platform, you can see the good work that some of the Freedom senators, we're not there at the moment. We used to have David Leyonhjelm. But that's what we're working really hard to as a party, is getting that federal representation. But it's about that agreement, so you're not competing and eliminating each other to get that platform. And that's a solution that would have enabled us to get that representation and still pursue and remain true to our ideals. Like I said, with the Libertarians, we're very purist, ideologically based on those principles. So it would be tough to take maybe One Nation's policies on a bit more protectionist policies. You know, we would side more on the free market. So rather than having fighting inside there, because inevitably, if you're not perfectly aligned, it'll break up, and that's a big challenge of the Liberal coalition. Is that, you know, I think half the time the leadership's more focus, whether it's in Labor and Liberal, on keeping their team together on the one picture than actually delivering what's right for Australians. Yeah. But on the other hand, I mean, the Greens are, regrettably, because I don't agree with a lot of what they stand for, not that, you know, I try to come from a position of empathy or understanding that I'm not saying a lot of them don't have good values, but their belief system that then goes from those values, I think they're on the wrong track. And they're no longer an environmental party. They're very much socialist. Yeah. You know, the old watermelon analogy, green on the outside, red in the middle. Yeah. But in some ways, and I'd hate for this to be taken out of context, how do I phrase this without getting clipped? But the Greens have been successful because they have grown from a very minor party to nationally a 10% party. They even have been winning lower house seats, which are the way the system is set up. And the way the major parties have written the rules recently, it's very hard to get lower house representation. But the Greens has been successful at getting 10%. Yeah. And so that's an aspiration for us.
I think early days, like when I very first started voting, what's that, like 16, 17 years ago? Oh, fuck, longer. Yeah, almost 20 years ago.
Same as me.
Yeah. I voted for Greens when I could, simply because I assumed they were the activist party and they were going to look after the environment. And I just made an assumption. I had no fucking idea what they were. I just did that, and I didn't like Labor or Liberal. That was as simple as it was. But I guess they had that picture of like that's what they were. That's what they were, without looking into them. I think people are starting to see through that.
I think the voting is indicating that as well.
And maybe they originally were in that way. I'm not 100%. But one thing is for sure is that, if that next third, regardless of whether it's divided amongst 10 other parties, it is taken up by those 10 other parties to make sure we don't have that complete domination of support in the House that can just ram through whatever fucking laws and policies they want.
I mean, that can happen when a major party or the government doesn't control the upper house as well. We've seen I mean, that misinformation, disinformation bill, the Liberals sided on the right side of history at the 11th hour.
Yeah.
But that was their policy.
Yeah.
They wrote the original. Sure, Labor ratcheted it up a little bit more, but that was a campaign policy position leading into the 2022 federal election. That, I've got screenshots of it. Every now and again, I repost it to remind people.
And regrettably,
so they could have the same agenda and the same worldview about that control and censoring, and so that's where those alternative viewpoints can highlight the differences.
And regrettably, I didn't vote in the last couple of elections because I felt so disillusioned with what the options were. Unknowingly, I didn't realise what I was doing. I didn't realise that not voting
is a vote for those that you don't support.
Exactly. And I could have been trying to at least give someone a seat that I believe in. And it only takes a little bit of looking into policies or looking into each of these parties and finding that minor party that you agree with the most, whether it's Libertarian, Greens. There's plenty of options. One Nation. They are there to actually have a look around at. Interestingly, I see Clive Palmer's just filed for, what was the party he coined today?
Trumpet of Patriots.
Trumpet of Patriots. It's interesting. I mean, he wasn't allowed to call it the United Australia or whatever. United Party.
I'm not across this fully. I suppose it's all been, for me, in recent times, the state campaign, and I was also secretary of the party, so a lot of administration as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but there's a few different theories about it, but in effect, he deregistered the UAP and then did not re-register in time to contest this next federal election.
Okay.
So Ralph Babette, so with the Senate, he's the UAP Senator for Victoria. They turn over every second electoral cycle unless there's a double dissolution.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't up for election, but Clive Palmer chose not to re-register. There's a few different theories out there. Given his litigious nature, I'm not going to outline them.
Yeah.
But interestingly, when you listen to Clive Palmer, he sounds very libertarian in a lot of his principles. Same with Gina Reinhardt.
Yeah.
But they tend to, with Gina, it'd be great for her to support us. You listen to her. She had some really good speeches, particularly based in rural centres around Australia. And I'm going, these are libertarian campaign speeches.
Okay, wow.
But getting away from that, for the record, she's not funding us.
Yeah.
But getting back to Clive and the UAP, he deregistered it and tried to contest that. Now, it was very obvious that he was going to lose that. There are some people who have said that was a face-saving option for him because he has still some good grassroots support. I suppose, but he's not registered to contest this election. So I think he's sort of running under the banner of, what do we say? What's Trumpets of Patriots? But I think, again, I'm not across it, but I think they have to effectively run as independents. So officially they'll be independents under and you can do that. That's
okay.
So you might be able to badge, but you're not listed as a political party when on the ballot, for example.
Well, it seems to be that the answer really is voting for the minor parties, no matter who you believe to be the best option. I think I said this the other day, I'll never tell anyone how to vote. Don't even know how I'm going to vote in the next two upcoming elections. So it's great for me to be able to get across different parties' values and what they're like as a person. So you've given a great representation of yourself and of your party, but also just more so the fact that we cannot have that sort of balance of power so heavily swayed in one direction. So thanks so much for joining us. It's been a bloody good chat, mate. Anything you want to plug before we finish up?
Oh, of course. I'm here with the privilege of representing the party for the state election. So I would just ask your viewers to, I think you nailed it, be informed, look us up. So we haven't spoken particularly policies and positions, and that wasn't the intent here. But look up, we've got the 6 pillars of freedom, unlocking WA's potential. So it's a good read. It's not too long. It's not TLDR, as they say. But if you want to know more about how we apply those libertarian principles, look up our campaign platform, And similarly, if we're in that position where the federal campaign and election is overlapping with our state one. So we released federal policies on Australia Day, and they're a very good read. But obviously, as West Australians, please look up the West Australian campaign platform. And for those people listening from outside, it's a very good read.
Yeah,
the policies there at the federal platform. So
perfect. I'll just plug Return to Zero, I guess, what would you call it? Self-help conference, I'm going to call it, Return to Zero. And very excitingly, we got 6 keynote speakers. I've got Dr. Anthony Chafee. I've got Boris Walter talking hypnotherapy, hypnosis, past lives. I've got Dr. Stephen Bright talking the impact of psychedelics in regards to PTSD and mental health. I've got Cameron Watkins talking about nervous system and breath work. Dr. Sally Price talking about gut health. And I always forget one. Eddie Enever talking about holistic health and cancer cures. So it's going to be really good, and probably most exciting. It's going to be a conference of 2 halves. At the end of each half, there's going to be 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A with the audience getting to ask their individual questions to the people on stage that have just spoken. So really good. I hope people can grab a lot of tangible things that they can take home from that conference.
When's that coming up?
That's April 11th, and it's going to be at Planet Royale, which only houses 250 seats. And my pre-registration haven't even put the tickets on sale yet. The pre-registration, which you can go onto our website and pre-register, is that like 60 people have already pre-registered for that, which means even if most of them will buy 1 or 2 tickets. So that'll be like half the tickets sold before I even put them on sale. So you want to get in quick.
Yeah, count me in.
Or I would pre-register now. So go onto the website. But I am hopefully releasing those tickets on Friday or early next week. So, that's going to be exciting. And very excited about that. But thanks so much, mate. I really appreciate your time. And cheers for the chat.
Thank you, sir.